Hello, hello. So here we go again with a little bit of explorations, trying to get to the point where we can play some games here with the hue and get a very different look for our little monster here. Before we do get to that point, I wanted to just see how we actually created this thing. And that starts with a 3D object. I have it in a brush eventually. This is a model from Michel Agoudot at Couleur Enfant. And this is a model that we have a 3D version of. So what we'll do is we'll go into the View menu, Utilities, and look for the widgets and the widgets to render an OBJ. So we have a 3D wavefront OBJ object version of it, and we can look at it in different orientations, different angles. It starts, of course, by loading that 3D OBJ, and that's the Open Geometry option. And I have two versions here. One is just the pumpkin by itself, and you see it right there. In fact, you know what? Let me get out here and clear the whole image. There you go. And hide the current brush. There you go. And go back to View. What is it? Utilities, Widgets, and Render an OBJ. All right, so right now we have just this basic pumpkin. No face was carved on it yet. We didn't do what we need to expand on this model is add a clip mask so that we can also carve out some eyes. That will happen in another stage. Right now we're looking at just the 3D model from different angles. We can actually see it in wireframe, or just by default it's the bounding box, because this is a viewer that we developed initially for the 3D trees. And of course, they can be very big with a lot of leaves, lots of branches. So in bounding box is very interactive. Then we have the wireframe mode, and then we have the shaded mode. And it always returns back to the final rendering in shaded mode, right? So you can start with something that's you view it in wireframe, for instance, like this. As you're turning it, it's going to be perhaps a bit more responsive that way. And at some point, we then see it come back to the shaded rendered mode. So this is one of the models. There is another one that's even funnier, the one where it's a little house. And so this one, if I load this up, like something like this, you've seen some other tutorials, I presume, where you can choose the orientation you want for it. There it is. So here we actually have a 3D geometry of the face with the eyes and the mouth cut out. And the whole thing is kind of a little house. Some critter or some animal might live in this house. And what we're going to do is simply place it around like this. So we have a nice, fairly large view of it. And then we'll pick it up as a custom brush. Perhaps a little bit more back. There you go, something like this. And we'll pick it up as a custom brush and make the background transparent so that we can stamp this thing down and paint with it. Let me turn it a little bit more so we also see some openings in the ladder that's on the side. There you go. So you see some openings here, because that will give us a chance to show some of the techniques for the selection process to hide and make the background transparent. All right, so let's say we use this and okay that. So perhaps one thing I'll do is I'll store this image just so we have a snapshot of it right here. We can always return back to that. For instance, if I load this and I say, okay, that was cute, let's go back to this, click on that, and it loads that image. All right, so let's say we want this one and we want to make the background transparent. That means we need to define a selection mask. That's easily done with a couple of tools. This one here, the magic wand on the toolbar, approximately in the middle of it, you have a magic wand. You've seen that in many other programs, I'm sure. And you can just click on the background and it selects the background. You can tell that the other parts are not selected because they are turning purple, and that's an option that you see under the selection menu if you enable overlay. If you didn't do that, you would still see the marching ants. You'll still see some lines moving along the selection edge, and that you can disable too. If you have a very slow selection, you could turn that off, and then you wouldn't really have a visual feedback of what is selected and what isn't. So it's good to have at least one or the other, and possibly both. I say let's keep the overlay, and one thing you can do is zoom in. I'm using the Control and Shift key here with the right button, because one thing we need to do is select a few more areas. See this one here, click that, this one too, this one, there's even more, and we'll need to add that to the selection. Right, so the way to do that is we hold the Shift key down as we select it. Something like that. And then also this one, there's a few here that are single pixels. With anti-aliasing enabled, we might miss that. No, actually get it just fine. Click on the outside, click on these and these as well. So that's a shift click, right? You want to add to selection. And then also take a look on the right side where the ladder is. There are some openings here too. So do another shift click on that. Shift click here, here, here. And you know, when you work with selections like these, and sometimes these can turn into very complex selections, you might accidentally pick something like part of the eye. Nope, that's not supposed to be. You can undo that selection step. And you may want to occasionally take a snapshot of that. So I would go into there, store the selection. Right? Store selection creates a snapshot of your current selection mask. It's a grayscale image, well, mostly black and white right now here. And you can actually work with that too. And most importantly, if you lose that selection, you can simply click here to replace it. And it puts that selection back into play. And the next thing we can do is pick this up as a custom brush, right? But before we do that, we need to invert the selection, because what we did is selected the background parts between the ladder, around the pumpkin, everything. But we want, in fact, the opposite of that. We want the pumpkin to be solid, not the background. The background needs to be transparent. So what we'll do is we'll simply go and invert the selection right here. Or if you didn't do that, one thing you could do also is on that stored copy that you have, if you did that, you have the option to invert it and then replace it. And now that one goes into the active play. So you have now a copy of the selection mask that we want to use, where the pumpkin is visible and opaque, essentially, and the rest of it, background, is transparent, flagged as not selected. So what you want to do is pick up a portion of that image, not the whole thing, because the edges are not selected when it's in the anti-alias mode, and most importantly, there's a lot of wasted space here. So let's not use that whole image. We could do that, right? We could go to brush and then use selected as brush. But that entire selected area has a lot of unusable or unused content. It might be much smarter to have the custom brush selected there. Below the wand, below the magic wand, you have a custom brush selector. And with that, you get your selection marquee to come close to it, not too close. Make sure you get everything you need. And then pick that up. And oh, it actually did a replay here. But it also picked that brush. And the reason why I did a replay is I have this thing enabled that does a post-production. So let me turn that off right now. Post-production, turn that off for now. Okay, let me undo just so you can see it again. And we'll get the selection mask again. So here's the inverted mask. Here is the one we want. And let's go custom brush selection tool. Let's go from about here to down here. There. Oh, it still did the replay. Not sure why. Oh, maybe there's this one here with the gradient. That's why. I have two replay options here. So let's undo that and do it one more time. So custom brush. And I mean, I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't care about the fact that it's repainting. I'm going to clear that image afterwards anyway. Okay, but this is the way it would normally show. You pick it, and that's the only thing that's happening. But if you have some replay actions enabled here, then of course it replays that brush movement that you just did. It wasn't a paintbrush selection, it was the selection of with your marquee, but still it's a sequence of positions, and it can replay along with the repaint effect that we saw showing. And through the mask is where we picked this thing up. We can store that brush now. Let's go to the brush menu and store to manage it. You can see the background is transparent, and it is pretty tight towards the selection that we wanted. We can also give it, take that brush and store it as an image. So that gives us actually the whole selection, not the entire image, just the part that we picked up that's in the custom brush. It puts that into a stored image copy with the selection mask too. Right, so you can click there to restore that if you accidentally mess this up or destroy the mask and you have it all gone. A very fast way to restore that is you click on this. Well, in this case, the image that we have stored is smaller because we selected a portion of the original image, so it doesn't fit in here anymore. Not exactly. We have, of course, options here to say scale it in if you need to do that, and a few others such as replace the image. I'm going to stay away from that. I'm going to go and simply say we have a brush. This is not the brush. This here is the brush. That's the brush copy. I can minimize the selection, stored copy of the selection. Don't need it anymore at this time. But here's my brush, and I might want to do a couple of things to that. I might want to make it a little bit brighter. Right, perhaps even change the hue. Right, give it a very different look. A blue pumpkin, why not? And also a little bit more saturation or less of it. A little bit more on the pale side. This guy needs his vitamins, right? Could also make it a slightly different angle. And then, of course, also flip it. Now, that's not something you do here, but right now, if we enable the preview here, you can enable the eye, so you see the pumpkin that we're painting with. You can also hit, what is it, X for sideways, or H for horizontal. You know what, I keep forgetting. What's the shortcut for the brush? Or you can just use it here, flip horizontal. Oh, it is X. Okay, so there it is. Okay, so I don't know if that worked. Oh yeah, there it is. I didn't have the keyboard focus. So I have X for horizontal, Y for the vertical axis, and so you can easily change that and then store that one if you feel like that's really what you want to work with. So you have a stored copy now that looks at it in a different direction. If you reset this one, it goes back to its original size, orientation, and hue, colors, everything. So we have a stored copy here, a stored copy here, and what I'd like to do now is paint with it in such a way that we get to draw this dragon we saw earlier. And so I'm going to clear out the background and simply draw a path, something like this. It's a little bit too big. I'm going to make it smaller, something like that. There you go. And I'm going to also perhaps reduce the distance from one to the next. You can tell the distance is still pretty big. And what I'd like to do is perhaps make it a little bit smaller. That's a step distance. So let's make it about 5 or 7, 8, something like that. Okay, so it's a little bit closer together. And then the next thing I'll do, of course, is give it a nice appearance like this. But I want it to be a big head at the end. So now I have a couple of ways to do that. I can simply resize it here and put the head on top, perhaps about this size, and stamp it down here. And another option for it is to actually control a replay, because right now it's all the same size along the entire body until I stamped the bigger head on top of it. I really should also have the body itself get smaller as it's farther away. Right back there, the tail should be a very small part of it. But right now, if I'm doing this, it doesn't change size. So I can do that with the post-processing under the View menu, post-adjustment. Right, so that's the one we had enabled over here initially, a little bit earlier. That's where you can set the enable the brush to be post-adjusted from the brush stroke. So if I go, the default, if I reset this, is it starts big and then goes small. So if I go from the upper left like this, it will become smaller and smaller. That's not what I want. That's the opposite of what I want. right? So I mean, I could paint this on top later, and it still wouldn't do the right thing because it's still doing this post adjustment. So what I want really is the opposite. So grab these points here, make it the opposite. Grab this point, make it big, and now you see it go from small to big. Right? So you have a small, far distance going to the big. Post-process takes care of that. Now you might want to have it smaller altogether, so you can introduce and drag additional points here on that curve. And then perhaps at the very end have a sudden increase where the head will automatically come to the full size. So that's an interesting one that we probably are exactly the one that we're looking for. All right, so here we have maybe just one like that, maybe one like that, little tadpoles, right? Little tadpole snakes or something like that. And so at this point, there's a couple of other things we can do. There is also on this thing the gradient adjustment, but that depends on what type of brush you have, and right now it's not using it because it's using the colors that come from the brush image itself. That's because we told it to do so. That's the style. You can change that from the color mode to the matte mode. If you use the matte mode and you didn't have the post adjustment, it will simply do this. If you enable the gradient, then it does a replay against that. So now it does the replay on the size. If you don't do the size, you don't get the size to change, but you do get the colors, right? So the gradient, you can click on that gradient to see other presets. The default one is, of course, a black to white or white to black gradient. And you have lots of other colorful choices here. I'm going to go one that's perhaps more like skin color for a snake. Something like this. Let's see what that does. Cool. Let's add the size control. So we have a bit more of a realistic snake. And now the thing that I'd like to do is combine the two. Right? Have the one where the matte appearance, this one here, and the color appearance are both together on the same path. And that's how we can do that. We can do a first one where the size is going to be the only thing because the colors is what we currently use. That's the style is in color mode. So let's say I'm doing something like this. Okay, and no, not exactly. Okay, let me do that again. Okay, something like this. And now I want to also add the colors. So don't touch anything, don't do another brush stroke. Let's keep this current brush stroke as the most recent one and simply change the style to matte and then replay a brush stroke. The most recent brush stroke can be replayed. Instead of doing the undo, you do a redo with the shift key. I think there's an option here perhaps also. You know what, let's not waste any time. I'll just tell you. It is simply Shift A, right? So Shift A will replay the brushstroke if you still have the keyboard focus on it. I don't know if we do, so I may need to redo that. All right, so first of all, in color mode, because I've done all sorts of other things here. Here's the color mode initial play. Oh, I went too far. Let's undo that. There. Okay, and now shift to the matte mode, and then Shift A replays, and oh, look at that, it now replayed it. All right, so how do we combine the two? Well, this image you can store. The prior image, if I undo, you can also store. So you now have two images, and you can combine them in a couple of ways. Put them into two layers and select the way that the layers blend. Or if you only want to do this very quickly, what you do is you start with the colored mode, something like this. Okay, and then you store just that one. So I'm going to close this and close this. I'm going to store this only one. And now I'm enabling the style or the matte, selecting matte. Hit Shift A. So it's repainting along that brush stroke. And now I have something I can combine back into this one. I can say, for instance, go and put these into a screen mode blend. So I could combine the two together. Or I could do, in addition to that, another screen mode blend, so it gives it a bit more dominance from the blue side. It's very light though, because it is bright and getting brighter. at some parts. I could do a multiply that will make it darker. Maybe that's too much, so use the undo to blend somewhere in between. Perhaps you like this, but you'd like to add some more saturation, so you go back to the adjustment, and that's where we were at the beginning of the tutorial. All right, so here we go to, let's say, hue saturation value, and that's exactly where you can say, let's change the brightness or the color or the saturation. Here, let's make it highly saturated, and then you can rotate through these through the color space in the hue and give it the color you want on the head, maybe a bit more on the reddish side there, something like this. All right, so that's basically it for a quick look at combining some of these images in such a way that you have an appearance of multiple styles. The original here, this one, and the one we had also, which was just, let's undo that, just this one here. Combining the two, I can store this, I can later combine them. In fact, let's do that for final comparison. I'm going to go into the layer system here. Where do we have them? Layers, there, on the sidebar. So right now I have this image in the first and only layer. I'm going to add another layer, and in that layer I'm going to place this guy. So the two together now are being blended. If you feel more comfortable with having a blank layer underneath it, you can do that too. Let's just select this layer and drop it down. There you go. So now we have a layer 0, a layer 1, and a layer 2. And layer 1 and 2 need to be combining somehow. So you select the top one, layer 2, and adjust perhaps how much of that you want to see, but also what blending mode you want. And that's where you have the default is the same as the multiply, but there are many other ways to combine it. Screen mode comes to mind, and you see an immediate real-time feedback here of what it's going to look like. So it's doing that blending very quickly for you. Some of these look just fabulous, and this one here is an interesting one, and I'm going to go and also adjust the opacity of that layer so that the amount or the intensity of its presence is felt a little bit less or a little bit more. And when you got it just right, just the way you want, that's when you can simply flatten those into a single image. So I'm going to do that, and we call it a day. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.